Drew Smith, this is your life. Welcome to the program. How are you today, sir?
Great to be here, Frank. I'm glad you're doing this for us.
We got a lot to get to. In fact, your favorite line is the one that really jumped out at me. You get more when you give more. It's almost like the concept of tithing in Malachi, where the Lord basically says, challenge me, see if I don't fill your barn. So that's has been your motto in life?
Boy, did he fill our barn. Absolutely, Frank. Yes. Yeah.
I mean, you found, are you a tither?
Yes.
And it's amazing because people think, wait a minute, I'm going to end out. You shouldn't be doing it to get the blessing, but you end up getting blessings. And that's the way you've lived your life. Tell me elaborate on this.
Well, and to me, tithing is obviously financial, but it's also my time, energy, and talents that God's given us. And I learned those talents, through various oddball means as I grew up. But I think at the conclusion of my life, I'm going to look back and say the best paychecks I ever got were investments in other people.
That's great. So you grew up in the 60s where there were drugs, hard rock, and violent rebellion. Your brother got involved, but in a weird way, that actually maybe brought you to the Lord to help shape your faith?
Well, it absolutely did. In the 60s, like you've described, society was upside down. Like you said, it was drug, sex, rock and roll. It was everything opposed to government, the military, ROTC buildings being burned down. Just everything was upside down. Anyway, my brother got sucked into that lifestyle, and he became so rebellious and violent. At one point, it just broke my heart to see him in a violent confrontation with my father. And then he stormed out. He moved to Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, which is the epicenter of the drug culture. You could do no worse if you wanted to get screwed up in drugs than to move to Haight-Ashbury. I knew God existed. We went to church occasionally as a kid. I didn't know God. I didn't know, had no relationship with him. But I sat down after I saw that. I said, God, I'll do anything you want if you just help my brother. And 2 weeks later, he called home and said, I'm studying the Bible. It's like, whoa.
How old was he?
He was 17. I was 14. And so he moved back home, and that started my faith journey, his as well. And that early beginning really created not only a sound understanding of who God was, but a relationship with God through prayer and that sort of thing.
How has he turned out?
Pretty well. He took a different course in life.
Yeah, still a believer or?
On and off. Yeah, that's kind of a whole story in and of itself. But,
yeah. But that's interesting. Did you, were you at Ladue Chapel, or you said you were going to church a little bit, or where were you?
Our family went to Webster Groves Christian Church on occasion, but weren't real, weren't really invested in church.
That's odd that you became a pretty on-fire Christian without that mom and dad really, living.
Yeah.
They were probably God-fearing, moral people, but maybe not in love with the Lord.
A good way to describe it, when Mike, my older brother, and I got very involved, they kind of fired back up and said, we ought to get serious about faith as well. And they went one way, we went another. But, I think that was the launching of our various faiths in our family.
So like every Christian path, it's not all smooth sailing. And I think your quote was, I kind of fell through the cracks in high school. It wasn't a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, again, it was the 60s, so everything was upside down. Education was just, their theory then was it should be an open door. They took down the walls in the school. That was every kid should find his own path, and there was no direction. And everyone just kind of did their own thing. I fell through the cracks because I wasn't focused on school. I was focused on faith, and I was a super nerd. I was focused on motorcycles and what that meant to me at that time.
Well, how do you go from, we'll get into this a little bit smoother transition-wise, but I imagine being a Christian back then, I mean, even though probably the amount of true Christians has gone down over the years, but to be an on fire and wear Jesus on your sleeve back then,
I was an oddball.
Rare.
I was an oddball. Yeah. And I didn't care.
But where do you think that self-confidence came from? Well, it came from the Lord.
You absolutely did. And, I brought a very good friend to the Lord. I didn't actually know him, but in one of my classes, history class in high school, a history teacher knew of my faith, and he asked me if I wanted to speak about it, and I did. And then one of the kids in the class kept raising his hand. He was a very quiet kid, and I could see, over time I realized he had a lot of family issues and all that was suppressing him, but he came to the Lord in the process, and it really helped his life. And I'm going, I can do this, or the Lord can do this.
So you didn't get the athletic genes, but you got the mechanically inclined genes.
Yes.
You were working on cars at a really young age. What could you do at 16 to a Mustang?
I could overhaul the carburetor and make it run. Back then.
Now, how do you learn that? There was no, you couldn't go to the internet.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. If I could back up, can I back up in history a little bit and bring that whole side of me in? Because that was a very fun, formational piece for me. As a kid, I grew up loving to play with my trucks and tractors in the dirt. I loved taking things apart. I took the family lawn tractor completely apart, every piece on the basement floor.
Was that a wheel horse, by the way?
It was a wheel horse, 10 horsepower.
We had one too.
Well, imagine every part in the basement floor. And I brought my father down so proudly, and he's going like, "What did you do?" I go, "I can put it back together. I drew some pictures." And I put it all back together. It ran great.
Oh, my goodness.
But
that was just a natural God-given gift.
Well, it was a gift, and what really exploded it was in junior high school, a friend of mine let me ride his Honda 50 mini bike. These had just come out. I rode this thing. It was like the coolest thing that had ever happened in my life. And I went back home, and I said, "Dad, these are so cool. We got to get one of these." Describing. He goes, "Hold on a minute, son. There'll never be a gun or motorcycle in this house." And I just let that blow past me, and I kept pestering him for a year about how cool it was. And after a year, I said, "I'll even pay for half of it." And he goes, "What do you mean half?" Well, I took that as meaning if I bought the whole thing, I could have one. So I was out the door. I grabbed a lawnmower, went down the street, got some lawn cutting jobs. My mother, bless her heart, took me around to all the Honda dealers to show these things to me, and every dealer said $289. I can remember that number. So anyway, I decided I wasn't earning money fast enough, so I said my name was Greg Smith, my 17-year-old brother. I got his Social Security number. I went to the local restaurant, got a job as a busboy. You remember King Brothers Motel by any chance?
Oh, yeah, right there in Frontenac.
Yeah, it's Frontenac Hilton now.
Right across the street from the Schnucks.
Yeah, they had a real greasy restaurant, and I was a busboy. And word got around the restaurant that Greg was a little slow because I had to remember my name was Greg. So I'm in a room, bussing a table by myself. A waitress walks by and says, Greg. And I'm going, why didn't the guy answer? Oh, that's me. So they kind of passed the rumor around that Greg was a little slow. And I earned all of $1.10 an hour, but it helped propel, helped build my savings account more and more and more because I was shooting for this $289 number, and I was saving maybe $20 a week, had a little passbook account. Anyway, my father saw that, hey, his son's turned into kind of a little entrepreneur here, and he has a very entrepreneurial background, so he kind of got into it. And so he said, okay, let me take you to the Honda dealer. So he said, son, I'm going to teach you about negotiation. I'm going, what's that? Well, he walked in a Honda dealer. He says, now, don't say a word. Just let me do the talking. And I walk up. I'm drooling over the blue Honda 50 mini bike. He goes, go look at something else. Pretend like you're interested in that. He says to the dealer, how much for this one? He goes, $289. He goes, oh, well, we think we can get one of those for $260. And $30 is a lot of money to me. And he says, no, $289. And my dad says, Drew, just shut up and follow me. We start walking out the door. Soon enough, as soon as we have the hand on the door, salesman's right behind us. We'll take $264. And I go, sold. And my dad goes, I wasn't done yet. But we took $264. And I'm up to maybe $200, and I'm looking at another month of earnings before I'm at the magic number. My dad comes home from work, throws me the keys, and says, hey, Drew, would you grab something out of the car for me? And I go open the trunk, and there it is, the blue Honda 50 mini bike. And I'm drooling. I'm about ready to grab it. He walks out the door and says, wait a minute, before you touch that, you got to read this. And he holds up a typed up contract, big letters. And it's a contract for the $32 remaining, whatever it was. I had to pay $5 a month. There was an interest charge. There was a $2 late charge if I missed that. So I learned all about contracts and bill of sales and all that kind of stuff. And I was pretty faithful in those payments because I was not going to get off that mini bike. And side story, I'm sorry, I'll shut up in a second. I made the mistake of letting him ride it. And he thought it was really cool. So he went and bought one. And we had a place on Lake of the Ozarks, and we'd be buzzing around the woods. He decided pretty soon that was too small. He got a bigger one. Then I bought his other one. Then he got a bigger one. Anyway, it turned into 4 decades of motorcycling together, both in the dirt, eventually on the street. We toured all over the United States on street bikes. It was just
you and your dad.
Me and my dad. And it was a great way to spend a lot of time with Dad.
And back then, especially with the mini bikes, which were so small, you didn't even have to wear a helmet, did you?
Well, I had to wear a helmet. That was in the contract.
Okay.
My mother would call it my hat. You make sure you wear your hat.
Yeah. I remember my grandma bribed one of my brothers, I'll pay you this much money if you sell your motorcycle.
Uh-huh.
And he sure did. All right, we got a lot to talk about
Sure.
still. So you were we mentioned you were a nerd in high school, but you were nailing your grades, and Ladue gave you a great education. Were you like a straight A guy?
Well, actually, I would probably correct that a little bit. I was lost in high school. I did the minimum to get a high school diploma, and I took minimum number of classes. But I graduated.
Get on the honor roll though?
Not in high school.
Oh, okay.
Interestingly, so the next step was I didn't go to college right away. I had no interest in college. I was working as a small engine mechanic, loving it, thinking this was my life. And my father, God bless his wisdom, he comes to me one day. He wasn't going to tell me what to do, but he said, "Drew, what do you think you'll be making 4 years from now?" And I'm calculating in my head, I was making $250 an hour. And I thought that was commanding a lot of money in the day. And I thought, well, maybe $350 an hour. And he goes, "Let me just show you something." And he put a piece of paper down that showed the income for mechanical engineers, and it was like $17,000 a year, which was 6 times what I'm making.
Yeah.
He goes, "You love working on engines. Wouldn't it be cool to design engines?" And I'm going, "Wow, never thought about that. That would be really cool." So I said, maybe this engineering thing's for me. So went down to WashU, got accepted. The guidance counselor, I handed him my transcript. He didn't look at anything on it other than the title. It said Ladue High School. Oh, Ladue High School. He didn't see I took almost no math, 1 semester of science, nothing that would have qualified me to walk into engineering classes. But he signed me up for engineering calculus, engineering physics, engineering chemistry, all of which require a bunch of prerequisites. So I show up the first day in engineering calculus. The teacher wrote "sine of 30 degrees" on the board, and I meekly rose my hand, kind of look around and goes, "What does sin mean?" And the whole class broke up. They thought I was joking. Teacher was laughing. He kind of looked at me again. He goes, "That kid's serious." He goes, "That's trigonometry, and that's a prerequisite to take this course." And
wow.
After the class, I said, "Well, what's trigonometry?" He kind of explained it. I went to the bookstore. I bought a book on trigonometry. I stayed up all night and studied that thing, went back to that calculus course, got an A in it. I fortunately passed my physics and chemistry, all of which was based on calculus that I should have had in high school. And what I learned through that was fear drove me, because at this point in my life, I was going, man, I don't want to fall back into just being a mechanic. There's an opportunity here that I can't screw up. And I was driven by fear, and I was powered by just grit. It was just plain grit. My entire day was just focused on learning and learning at a pace, because I was so afraid of all these other kids who were younger than me, who were honor students in their high schools, who had all their prerequisites. And I just studied my butt off. And I ended up on the honor roll in college and a dean's list and all that kind of stuff. But it was just grit that got me through.
Well, I wonder how many times a guy ends up on the WashU dean's list after having an uneventful academic career in high school.
Yeah, like a big zero in
Yeah.
academics. Yeah.
All right, so your next move out of college it was a mechanical engineering degree.
Yeah.
Your next move is?
Well, let me just back up to my senior year, because in my senior year, I was, again, just a super nerd. All I knew was engineering. And I was in the mechanical engineering student organizations, the Society of Automotive Engineers, student section, the Society of Mechanical Engineers student section. I was president of the Society of Mechanical Engineers, big title for a senior. Anyway, 2 funny stories. One, I'm walking around campus. I meet a guy, and he goes, "Oh, I'm in SAE." And I go, "Oh, you are? I get the magazine. Did you like that article about fuel injection, how they're inducing electrons?" He's going, "What are you talking about? SAE is a fraternity." And I'm going, "What's a fraternity?" And then the first meeting of my senior year, in walks this really cute girl named Meg Cherry, and I'm just smitten. And she actually talks to me. I mean, I'm just such a nerd. And we turned into great friends, and 18 months later, we're married. And then to get back to your question, at graduation. So Meg was a year behind me because she had to work every other semester to pay for her college. So I took a job in St. Louis at Procter & Gamble because I wanted to work at a company that would teach me how to run a business, kind of following my father's footsteps. And a year later, the cool thing about Meg is that she just kicked my butt. I mean, in college, she carried me through some of the senior level classes.
What was her major?
Mechanical engineering.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah.
So she was really bright.
She was very bright. Yeah, yeah. She's definitely the bright one of the pair. And when she graduated, she got this phenomenal offer with Exxon at the refinery in San Francisco. And the cool thing about Meg is, as long as she worked, she made more money than I did. And I was smitten with wanting to live in California. So on Meg's coattails, we moved to California. Over the next 7 years, we lived in 3 different cities, had 4 houses, and 2 children along the way. And in my last year at Procter & Gamble, by this time we're living in New York. I'm working at their plant in Staten Island. She's working at the J&J Band-Aid plant in New Jersey. And I'm really getting fed up with work. This is a hardcore union environment. This is a 100-year-old plant. These folks are older than my grandparents. They know all the tricks. It's impossible to get anything done. It's a very adversarial relationship, and it just grinds you down to nothing. I had one guy threaten my life and told me where I lived and was going to come after my wife, and it was just killing me. So I decided at that point, I'm going to either start or buy my own business. And there were 4 things important to me. 1, it was manufacturing. 2, it was not high tech. 3, it was in a non-union, non-adversarial environment. And it had to be an industry I could really wrap my head around and enjoy. And so I was looking for a business in New Jersey. My father had since sold his confectionery business and was investing in other businesses. He ran across a business in St. Louis called Code 3, and they made lights and sirens for police cars. And I thought, wow, that's something pretty cool. And they needed, the new owners needed to provide somebody to run production and new products and somebody to run sales and marketing. And so I called my brother-in-law, who was a marketing and sales guy, just a crackerjack at it, talked to him about it. We both got really excited. We moved back to St. Louis, bought that business. And that started a new career for me. Just one quick story. The cool thing about it was I was in charge of product development. So I spent my first 6 months in police cars, fire trucks, ambulances, just learning how people use these things. And I came out realizing that cops become a cop. They have a gun and a red light. Firemen become a fireman. They have a fire hose and a red light. And the more toys on it, the better. In fact, we got to the point where if we could just add more toys to a new product line, they would get rid of their old stuff that was perfectly fine and buy the new stuff because it had more features on it. And so I told our product development group, look, every product we build, we're going to exceed the industry standards for performance, but we're also going to add 5 or 6 toy factors to it to really trip these guys' trigger. So that was just a huge creative outlet for me. I had probably 6 patents, applied to the products that we made and so forth. So,
and you didn't know anything about lights at the time, did you?
No, I had to go learn it. Yeah, I got on the Society of Automotive Engineers group that wrote the specifications, contributed a lot of thought to what those ought to be and that sort of thing.
So you're still in a state of shock that this good-looking woman showed interest in you.
Oh, my God. Yes, Meg. Yeah, and the beautiful thing was, as outstanding as she was in her profession, she gave it all up to become a mother. That was far more important to her. And God bless her, because it's been such a blessing. And, she's the engine that drives the family. And we have 3 great kids. And if I could divert and maybe talk about some of the kids here.
Yeah, but let's stay with Meg a little bit longer,
go ahead,
though.
Please.
So she, after the second child, she quit and became a full-time mother, or was she
that's
have all
right.
3?
Yeah, no, we had Barbara, when we left New Jersey to come to St. Louis to buy Code 3, Barbara, our oldest, was 2, and Kevin was, she was pregnant with Kevin. She had Kevin when we moved to St. Louis.
Yeah. And would you describe your infatuation with her as strong now as it was when you first met her?
Oh, yeah, and in so many different ways. I think the beautiful thing is we learned early on to laugh at each other's differences instead of trying to change the other person. That just breaks down so many barriers between people, and it's just great to still be in love with the mother of my children and my best friend.
I know there's plenty of examples of a couple that doesn't have the faith, that's have this incredibly great marriage and still in love with each other, 30 plus years later.
Yeah.
But don't you think faith has something to do with that?
Yes.
A big role in the love?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Elaborate.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna jump around from script here and talk about 2 big areas where God has placed played a huge role in our life. We succeeded amazingly with Code 3. It became the largest in the world at what it did.
How many employees, by the way, at one time?
400. And
sales were as high as
80 million. And we were at a point where we needed to grow exponentially. So we were going to go public to raise the funds to do that. Ed, my partner and brother-in-law, said, we ought to also get some private offers to sell privately just to keep the bankers honest in the process. So he walked in my office and I'm thinking I'm going to do this till I retire. He walked in my office one day and said, Drew, you got to take a look at us. Now, it's a private offer, and they don't need us, so we'd be gone. And I'm going, Ed, I want to do this till I retire. And I said, let me take a look. I saw the number. I said, here's the keys.
How old were you then?
Late 30s.
Wait a minute.
Early 40s.
So
40s.
You didn't officially retire, period, or did you work much after that?
Great lead in, Frank.
Yeah.
So we sold that in, I should probably do the numbers backwards. We sold that in 99. Yeah, 99 we sold it. And I was born in 55, and while I'm talking, you can do the math. I forgot how old I was. So to go back to your original question about God playing a role in our life, I sold that, and I just thought, what am I going to do next? And so just started looking around at investing or buying other businesses. And I got this fax out of nowhere from a business group I was in called Young Presidents Organization, inviting our family to go to Tijuana, Mexico to build a home for the poor called Homes of Hope. And you're familiar with that. Yep. from church. We went down there with our whole family, and we're just blown away. One, to see the level of poverty those folks live in. Would never have comprehended until I saw it personally. But the cool thing was the impact on the kids as well, to see that. If in a day and a half we built this 18 by 20, we'd call it a storage shed here. To them it was a castle. I mean, they're living under tarps and a few pallets. After we had finished our house, my son Kevin was in grade school at the time. We went to look around the neighborhood, and one of the Christian volunteers that runs the organization kind of guided us around. We saw this little shack. It was on a steep hill. It was maybe 10 feet wide and, 12 feet long. A family of 5 lived in it. It was on dirt. All of their possessions were in a garbage bag. And when it rained, it was mud. We walked in, it just smelled like urine. And when we walked out, my son, Kevin, turned to me and said, Dad, unless you had shown this to me, I never would have believed that people could live like this. It just blew him away.
He's old. How old at this time, roughly?
9, 10, 11. Yeah, he was, a young boy. And we were standing on top of this hill. As you know, Frank, it overlooked San Diego, and the sun was hitting San Diego office building in such a way it reflected back like gold. We're standing in this just corrupt poverty looking at the city of gold, and the contrast was just mind-blowing. And it really adjusted our life. We started getting very engaged in mission work like that, so we really felt a turn in our life. I was somewhat still involved in business, but not to the same degree. I began investing myself in Christian organizations on 3 different continents that serve the poor and help them stand on their own feet through Christian principle and self-help kind of programs. Then, Frank, the next story comes in 2011. 9/11, September 11th. I'm in my office at home. I'm talking to a business guy on the phone, and TV's kind of in the background, and I look over, and there's a burning building in downtown New York. I say, you seen the news? And at about that time, the airplane flies into the second building. We both say, terrorism. Right behind that, Meg comes to the office and says, my brother works there. And I'd forgotten. I'd forgotten that 10 years ago, Doug, her brother, asked me to be the trustee of his estate. And he had a very serious look on his face when he asked it. For a young kid to be that serious about it, I didn't quite understand it. It galvanized for me at that point. And I just have to tell you about Doug Cherry. Doug was a phenomenal young man. He was a super athlete. Swimming was his thing. They won state championships. But in high school, he didn't just hang around with the athletes. He also hung around with the guys who were kind of neglected and left out. And some of them, wanted to be in swimming, but they weren't cool. And he would pull them in and say, "You're going to go swimming with us." He'd swim with them. He'd help me swim along the same lane. He'd get them going, and they turned into a state champions in a large part because of Doug's leadership. He had 3 kids under the age of 10.
Ooh.
And he did 2 really smart things. He went to work for a company called Aon, a big insurance company that sells insurance products to other insurance companies. And he bought all the insurance they offered as an employee. When 9/11 hit, a good friend of mine in the same business group knew Pat Ryan, who's the CEO of Aon, called him and said, "Look, good friend of mine in St. Louis lost his brother-in-law. Can he call you?" And he said, "Yeah, here's my cell." I called him on his cell. He said, "We have ceased operations. Everyone's job is to care for 9/11 victims." And he said, "I've made a command decision without even consulting with my sub-insurers who would have to approve it, that anyone working for us who died in the tower was considered to be on travel because it meant double indemnity on their insurance, meaning they would double their insurance coverage."
Wow.
That made the difference between his wife having to work or be able to stay home. And she was able to stay home with those kids for the rest, of their time as young adults, because they were from age 3 to.
And are they still based in New York, those 3?
No, they've kind of scattered. She lives in Cleveland. The other 2 are scattered around the country.
And everything's gone well.
Everything's gone as well as could be expected.
Yeah. No, she hasn't remarried.
No. But it's just a beautiful family, a tough, tragic story, but some good pieces of the ending there.
And on to what you've done to help the poor. How many mission trips do you think roughly you've made?
Oh gosh!
And roughly how many countries over? We're talking about a 25-year span now.
Yeah. 3 continents. So in Asia, Cambodia, Philippines. There's 2 more countries in there I can't think of right now. In Africa, it was Rwanda, Ghana, Tanzania, and at least 4 more. They're just not coming to mind right now.
So would you go 1 trip a year, 2 trips a year?
I'd say probably 3 trips a year.
For the last 25 years?
Yeah.
So like 75 trips?
Maybe 50. Yeah, do you fair. It tapered off in the last 5 or 10 years.
Yeah. And I guess with your being so mechanical, you can actually build that house. I always wondered, I haven't had a chance to go yet, but I'm just so special needs-ish when it comes to screwing in a light bulb. What can I help? But then they just say, it doesn't matter.
It does not matter. No.
Carry bricks to the site.
No, it does not matter.
But you probably are a star of that because you can do all this stuff.
Well, actually, I got to the point where I'd step back and let others do it and experience, because really it takes no skills. The Youth with a Mission who runs it has talented carpenters who lead the work. They show you, they have it down to a honed process, do this first, then this, then this. And even the kids can pick up hammers, paintbrushes, whatever, and do it.
Our friend Tom Holly?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's like with me, can't do anything.
Yeah.
And he says, "You think I want to be good at that stuff?"
Well, it's funny because Tom went on one of the first trips I organized after that.
Oh, I bet he wasn't exactly.
He was a hoot.
Tom Vila, whatever. What's that guy's name? I don't know.
Yeah, Bob Vila. But
Vila.
What Tom did was he collected all the kids, and he was like a parade up and down the street, entertaining the kids, playing sports with them, and it was as valuable as building a house.
So there's a role for anybody who wants to help.
Anybody at all. That's right. Yeah.
Are you at all familiar? I guess you are. The Micah Project?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm very involved in that. And 10 years ago, they asked me to help develop a technical school, which they launched back then. And that's a story in itself. The other thing I did was help connect them with local society through this group I'm in. It's an international business group. And some of the richest people in Central America are in that group. And we got them to come around the Micah Project to help support.
Our St. Louis-based Micah Project? Or
Yeah.
Because we had them in last week.
Yeah.
In fact, I played in a pickleball tournament for the Micah
And you
Project
won. You and Monica won. Yeah, you're the big winners. Yeah.
Well, my wife carried me. What can I say?
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the kids.
Sure.
And we've done quite a few of these, and I've never seen such background.
Sorry about that.
No, it's great on the kids themselves. And I think sometimes you can judge a person by how his kids have turned out, and you're really proud. Let's begin with Barbara.
Yeah.
She was your first born in 1985, and wow, I know this is not the lead story because you're more proud of her character, but to be the leading appeals lawyer for Brian Cave, that's something else. She must really be smart.
She is one sharp cookie, and she outsmarts me all the time.
Yeah.
But she's also got a great wit, a big heart, and what I love her most for is how she's put her family first while carrying that huge responsibility at work.
But that must really be tough. She has two?
She has two, yeah.
And to have that job,
Yep.
Brian, she talk about time delegation. She must be the master of it.
She and her husband are both master at it. He's also a lawyer. He's the lawyer for Boeing's military division. They met at the Supreme Court. They were both clerks in the Supreme Court. And they do a masterful job of managing the kids. If something happens to one of the kids, they'll take turns taking the day off to take care of the kids. I mean, it's just a beautiful thing to see how committed they are to their kids.
And what jumps out at you about your daughter?
About Barbara, well, she was always verbal and a quick learner and a very quick wit. At an early age, she developed a real love for reading and language. She read every Nancy Drew book as a young, probably grade schooler.
Yeah.
In junior high, the thing she wanted most for Christmas was some arcane book on British grammar, and Meg somehow found it. But that's the kind of stuff that really tripped her trigger. And God forbid if you said in the house, "Where you at?" Using a preposition at the end of a sentence was not something she wanted to hear, and you heard about it. So I've learned to eliminate that from my language.
Now, have you ever seen her actually? I know she's an appeals lawyer, but have you seen her in the courtroom?
Yeah.
I bet that must be better than watching a game.
Oh, my God. And to keep my mouth shut.
Are you just probably amazed how sharp and they can be cutting and
fast,
sarcastic
and fast? Yeah.
How many times do you think you've seen her in the courtroom?
I was only able to do it a couple times, but where the kind of court she's in now, it's not as appropriate, but it's amazing. So a great story about her appeals capacity and her great wit. So she's at Brian Cave. She's in charge of appeals. So any other lawyers at Brian Cave in other trades like patent or whatever lose a case, they come to Barbara if it's a meaningful appeals case. So this first time, this patent lawyer came to her, an older guy, and he had lost a patent case and said, like, I think we got good grounds for appeal, and he had a 10-page thing all written out. I think you ought to do it like this. And so Barbara said, let me take a look. She took a look, and she wrote up her own view of how it ought to be handled, sent it over to the guy. He came back with it, just bled all over it, marked over it, do this, do that, take out this, take out that. He goes, and Barbara goes, now, before I consider this, why don't you call my boss in San Francisco, the guy who was in charge of worldwide appeals was there. And so Barbara reported to him. So the patent guy calls him, and he starts launching into how Barbara should do this and this. And he goes, stop right there. Tell you what, do what Barbara says. Click.
Wow, that's impressive.
So, the other thing about Barbara in her quick wit and great capacity with a pen is she became the high school newspaper editor. And she was also nearly the sole voice for conservatives at John Burroughs School, which is a very liberal school.
Yeah, it's
very liberal school.
It's like an oxymoron.
Yeah, so she'd be writing his editorials just to light people up. And she would light up that whole school and parents and everybody else. But she stood her ground. And one day she went to interview the headmaster. Now, background is one of the kids at John Burroughs had borrowed his mother's Volvo to drive to school. Well, he parked it, and it was a stick shift. He left it in neutral and didn't realize it. An hour later, it rolls off the parking lot down a hill and stopped by a tree. So the ground crew comes out, cuts down a tree, gets the Volvo out. So she goes into the headmaster's office. And now keep in mind, this is John Burroughs School, named after the famous naturalist of the 1800s. And she goes, how do you feel John Burroughs would feel about cutting down a tree to save a Volvo? He got so incensed, threw her out of his office, stomped down to the advisor of the newspaper and said, don't you ever send me another student without telling me ahead of time what they're going to ask. And rightly, the teacher says, no way. That's what newspaper's all about. So that was pretty awesome. The other really awesome thing that happened is she supported so many other kids of conservative nature who didn't have a voice. And we got calls from their parents. I remember 3 years after she graduated, there was a girl 3 years behind her that modeled Barbara, and her parents wrote me a beautiful letter about how Barbara got her through John Burroughs School and how she learned to find her own voice thanks to Barbara.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah,
That's
it just melts your heart.
All right, let's get to Kevin. He became the athlete in the family. High school, Burroughs, and college football. Where did he play college?
At WashU.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And what was it like? I bet you just got a big thrill watching.
Oh, we got a
every one of
huge
his
thrill.
games.
And the cool thing about Kevin is he's a very shy. He was a very shy, person to himself. But unbeknownst to us, he became a great friend to so many other kids. When he got into high school, he really wanted to play football. At that point, he didn't have the body for it, so he committed to really converting himself. He worked hard to develop the muscle and the speed and so forth to perform in football, and he succeeded in football all the way through high school and through most of WashU.
And then that great degree, a master's in accounting from WashU, where
Yes.
he'll be guaranteed of a job for as long as he wants it. Forever.
That's right. Yeah, and he worked for one of the top 5 accounting firms when he graduated, and then he is now a comptroller for a large company here in St. Louis, and he also invests in real estate on the side.
But you're most proud of his ability to be a father. We had a guy in here,
Yeah.
remember that, about a month ago, and he said, I didn't know how good a parent I was until I saw my son or daughter being a parent. And then I realized I was a success.
Well, yeah, and maybe that will give me credit. I don't know, but I give a lot of credit to both Barbara and Kevin for being just great parents. And Kevin's personality is such that he really looks out for the underdog. He's a real protector. And he loves his family. He's got 2 great kids. His 6-year-old son, Robert, when he's the firstborn, so I called him little guy. He calls me big guy. We were at our farm and fishing at the pond, and Kevin got his video camera out, was videoing me, and said, Dad, how's it going? I'm going, I ain't got nothing. And he pans down to little Robert, who's got his little Mickey Mouse fishing pole stuck in the rocks, and he's going, I ain't got nothing. But he also, as I mentioned, he's very protective. He and I scuba dive together, learned to scuba dive, and he was not only my scuba buddy but my protector. He would make sure I was at the right depth, that I was using the oxygen the right way, that I was strapped in correctly, and at the point where I wouldn't scuba dive again unless Kevin was there. Just the way he cares and looks after folks. He got a great wife, Megan. She's just a ball of fire. And there's something about all the women in our family. They're beautiful, intelligent, hard-charging, and they are their own person. Nothing stops them.
Mm. And the other woman, of course, is Molly. She is your caboose, as you phrase it.
Yeah.
Athletics, good right off the bat there, too. So
Yeah.
you had 2 athletes in your family.
We did, yeah. Molly was a field hockey player, and she's a story of both athletics and character. All 3 of the kids, I think, I just love the character that they exude in life. In Molly's case, she loved field hockey. She played it for 4 years. And actually, she went to Whitfield High. We had actually determined she was going to go to another high school. The night before signing up for the high school, she came to us and said, Mom and Dad, I've stayed up all night. I've really studied this. I really want to go to Whitfield, and here's why. A very cogent argument, and she expressed the strong commitment she had, and we looked, Meg and I looked at each other and said, how can you say no? I mean, she's so committed. So she went to Whitfield. And on the field hockey program, they had a long-standing tradition that the coach would assign a team captain from one of the seniors. Well, when Molly's a junior, she broke the tradition. There was one senior on the team, and she decided Molly, with her strong character and ability to rally the team, should really be the team captain, even though she's a junior. So she got the leg band that said team captain. She's the only one who could talk to the refs. She rallied the troops and that sort of thing. But the senior who didn't get it was very miffed and very vocal about it, as were her parents, who were kind of those parents at every game. And they were all miffed about it. Well, we saw all of her games in her junior year, except we missed senior day. We had some other commitment. So I go to the next game, and the father of this girl who's miffed walked up to me and said, we were so amazed what Molly did at that last game. And I'm thinking, what did she, I said, what did she do? And he looked at me, he said, I'm doubly impressed. She didn't tell you about it. And I said, what did she do? She said, before the game started, she walked over to my daughter, took off her team captain band, handed it to her, and said, it's your senior day. You're the captain today.
Oh, cool.
She didn't confer with the coach. She didn't ask the other players. She just did it. And it's just reflective of the spirit and character that she has.
So her passion was fashion, and she ends up fittingly at Neiman Marcus.
Yeah. And the story to get there is she went to SMU, and we asked her, what's your major going to be? And she said, digital fashion marketing. And this was, back when digital age was still kind of emerging, and we're going like looking at each other going, what does that mean? But we just hung with it. And as it turns out, again, she demonstrated her leadership skills and friendship. She became the president of her sorority, which plays into her first job. Came time for graduation, and she really leveraged her fashion degree, her interest in digital fashion, and the fact that she was president of the sorority, because she landed a job with a startup with a lady who started it, who figured out how to monetize how fashion influencers could get paid. Up to this point, influencers on the internet, they have some hobby and they post it on the internet, everybody likes it and talks about it. Well, now these fashion influencers could get paid for promoting Neiman Marcus or Saks some other player. And nobody ever figured it out before. Well, this lady in the startup figured it out. And it also turns out that she went to the same sorority. And so she got an instant interview, loved Molly, hired her, and she just blossomed there. And then Neiman Marcus realized they were falling apart at the seams because they were not in the digital age. And so they sought out Molly, drew her in. And a great story on that is her boss comes up to her one day and says, Molly, come with me. We're going to a meeting. And Molly doesn't know what's going on. Takes her into the CEO's office. And she says, Molly, explain to the CEO what you do. And she starts very cogently explaining what she does. The CEO stops her and says, Molly, I'm changing the schedule. Tomorrow I'm calling in all the top leaders of Neiman. We're going to have a meeting. You're going to run it and tell us what you do.
Wow. So what's her official title right now?
I think head of digital marketing, something like
That's
that.
great.
But it's, the whole Neiman model has fallen apart, particularly since COVID when people aren't going in a store. But I got to say, my mother is just smiling from heaven because I think she single-handedly kept Neiman Marcus alive for 2 decades in St. Louis. She loved taking her daughters and granddaughters on expeditions to Neiman Marcus. So she just...
Well, as we start to wrap things up here, your kids will listen to this, and they may listen to it this year, and they may listen to it 15 years from now. What would you want? I know you're a verbal guy, but what would you want them to know about how you really feel about them?
About the kids?
Yeah.
Your character speaks volumes about you. Nothing else in your life is as important as your character. And I learned this initially from my dad, just a quick story. And people will think this is so politically incorrect. But I said, Dad, how are you successful in finding good people? He said, I wouldn't tell anyone today, but back then I asked one important question. And there was mostly men he was hiring. He says, have you been faithful to your wife? And he said consistently, people that weren't going to be faithful in the workplace, weren't going to be people of good character. And he put character above all else. And today you probably can't ask that question, but it's a great measure of
Wow.
the worth of a man.
What would you want your wife to say about you at the end of your life?
Wow. I put up with him. Well, I hope she feels that we led a great spiritual life together and that together we raised a great family.
How about the grandkids and that pure, unadulterated love? What have they meant to you? Not individually, but collectively.
Well, collectively, the best gig I've ever had is the title Big Guy. And just the undying love they had, just jumping in your arms and hugging you, and there's no tension there and all that sort of thing.
Drew, we've done a lot of these, and I think I can speak for the group. This is about the best one we've ever done. You've educated us. Greatly appreciate you sitting down. And
I could speak for 2 more hours if you wanted to, but I suspect you got other things to get on to. And Frank, I want to thank you. This is really a gift to my grandkids and great-grandkids because I want them to see into who their parents were, get some view of what their great-grandfather and grandmother were like and what life can be like if they know who God is, if they're not afraid to get to know him, speak to him, and let him speak to them.
Well, that's what SoundStory is all about. That is the Drew Smith story.